So good morning. How is everybody this morning? Great. So who doesn't love a park? Yet despite all the superpowers, benefits of a park, which include health, economic, environmental benefits, parks are often not prioritized over other demands on limited public budgets. CCLR applied for and received funding from the U.S. Bank Foundation to support an initiative to expand park and open space development in underserved communities in California. We interviewed communities around the state about the barriers to park development and identified financial strategy and limited institutional capacity as key challenges. Armed with that, we contracted with WRT to develop Let's Create a Park funding guide. WRT shares our deep belief that open space infrastructure is an integral part of creating quality and equitable urban environments. Here to share information about creating parks and our Let's Create a Park funding guide is John Gibbs, a practice lead in parks, open space, and community design at WRT. John?
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, CCLR, and good morning, everybody. Everybody loves parks. Does everybody love karaoke? Because Jean and I were trying to figure out how to launch this. This is a really awesome online tool. I'm going to walk you through some of these strategies. But let's pick up where we left off last night with a little bit of karaoke. And I had 15 minutes here, so I was thinking, what's a song that goes for 15 minutes? I came up with Michael Jackson, Thriller. And we were deciding how to arrange the room. That's why Jean was getting everybody here to the center, was because we're going to have some big dance moves. We were getting LA TV stations, directors involved. They were a little busy canceling late night comedy, so we didn't get them interested, but we did settle on some Bob Dylan. So I'm going to do my best here. How many grants does it take to build a park? How can I get this thing done? The answer, my friends, is to stack local, state, and fed. The answer is, oh, it was just there. Next slide. The answer is, let's create a park. So a really cool strategy. It's pretty simple, straightforward. How do you stack funds? How do you think about the complexity of a place, of a vision that your community might have come up with, the complexity of a park, but then ultimately get that thing built? How do you fund that? And so this idea of stacking funding is some added complexity, and especially for a less resourced community to be able to figure out how do I approach this? So we've created a tool that helps break that down. And again, target audience being much more smaller towns, rural communities. We sought some pretty good advice with an advisory panel, had a number of cities and counties, Tracy, Mariposa County, Multnomah County in Washington, some rec and park districts, including San Francisco, and TPL, Trust for Public Land, were really helpful guides, and also are smart people that understand a lot of the funding opportunities as well. Some key takeaways was really sequencing of park development. How do you understand costs of the development, really by each phase, and really to identify the funding strategy, and especially multiple funding strategies. So the challenge with our parks, there's a great need, and a need that sometimes extends across a number of different issues. Sometimes it's access to parks, so it's about mobility. How do you get there? Are there trails? Is there transit connections? Condition of parks, climate issues, public health and wellness. And let's be clear that the benefit that parks provide to communities goes beyond the play structure, goes beyond the tree, but it's really the cumulative benefits for public health and wellness, mental health within our communities, certainly open space, biodiversity. And we have limited resources, so we have this need for a creative funding strategy. So what is that strategy? It's to really stack these different kinds of funding sources at the different, that relate to the different phases of the project. And the document is peppered with a number of interesting examples. The Hayward Area Recreation District had been able to assemble a couple different parcels. There were remediation issues. So DTSE grant really helped with the remediation and the cleanup. They had a bond measure that helped to purchase the property. And then ultimately, Land and Water Conservation Fund had $3 million for design and construction. So just a lot of good examples that are peppered throughout this, throughout the document. So we have these different steps of understanding, of identification, of sequencing, certainly securing the funding and managing the process and managing the park in the long term. So another good example that we used in here was an existing or a recently created park, the Ashland Zocalo. This is in the Ashland community in unincorporated Alameda County. And just using it as an example of the different things that may come up in a park and could be aligned to funding. So whether it's wildlife and biodiversity related to certain planting areas, arts and cultural components that may be infused into this community, and this is definitely a place that's reflective of its pretty vibrant, heavily Latino community within Alameda County. Issues of resiliency, so shade and urban heat island effect are integrated into this park and could be leveraged for some specific funding. Ashley, yesterday at Sustainable Strategies, she actually added a few new ones to my list related to earmarks. And so the THUD, DOT opportunity for transit access and sidewalks could certainly build the entire frontage of a park and provide those transit stops. So what we're trying to impress is that person who is really championing this park is able to think about the complexity of a park and then start to align that to those funding sources. You kind of have to know what you're doing and what's available, and even to the degree of starting to guide your park towards those kinds of funding opportunities, instead of doubling down on something that ultimately you may not be able to find adequate funding towards. Another good example, the case study that's in the document, is the Mariposa Creek Parkway. This is up in Mariposa County in the town of Mariposa. It was a master plan that the county undertook with the community, and it really centered around a couple of key themes. One was health and wellness within the community. The other was access to schools, access to jobs through walking and through biking. And lastly was around environmental restoration, so restoration of a creek and the incorporation of cultural burns in the indigenous community to realize this vision. So kind of all the right legs of a stool, those were really the three key pillars of this master plan, which lent itself really nicely to lots of different funding sources that could address resilience, that it could address fire, that could address creek restoration, and ATP funding associated with access. So kind of the right themes aligned with available funding kind of equals a lot of money to be able to plan and envision, a pretty significant turnaround for the town of Mariposa. And then just starting to conclude here, the document also really makes it clear that it's actually easier to find the capital funding for your park, but your work doesn't end then. Your work has to consider the long-term maintenance and operation of that park and of that facility, and ultimately the life cycle replacement. It's like you're still not done if you figured out how to mow the grass and how to trim trees and rake the mulch under the swing sets. No, you actually have to replace all those things at some point as well. Some communities have started to figure that out. We presented last year, City of Fresno passing Measure P, which was a sales tax increment, which then gives you super flexibility in how you spend those dollars. So it was really about funding the maintenance of the parks in that community as opposed to simply buying new parks. How am I doing on time? Okay, we're doing great on time. Actually, I might be wrapped up a little bit early. So really important to to make that point. The document also leverages some other really important hubs for park funding. We didn't try to go out and reimagine every single fund that was out there across the country. We did that to a degree, but what we also found was that there's a number of really great resources. So Change Labs, the City Parks Alliance is a really fantastic national organization. They do a lot of, they have a pretty nice hub for funding, grants.gov, there's the Funders Network, and EPA Region 9 and 10, they have some of their own kind of sources and organizations for funds. So just to say, we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel where we didn't need to, but to really be able to direct to a lot of those resources. So there's a ton of web links within this document, catchy graphics and things like that. No more singing in the document. We couldn't figure out how to do the audio portion, but you guys can add that on your own. This QR code does take you to the, document, so check it out. You could get out your phones now, not check an email, but you could check the QR code. And we really hope this is a fantastic resource, and I want to send appreciation to Gene, to US Bank, and to CCLR, Cheryl, for kind of recognizing the value of parks within this bigger mission that CCLR is after. Parks are the place where people come together, where we're really able to connect people together within that community. I think that's part of the core mission of CCLR. And so I just appreciate the organization for recognizing that value of parks. And I hope that you guys can continue to integrate parks into your work. I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you, guys.